Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about employee turnover and separation. Our goal is always to retain employees. However, when that is not possible, then we need to manage the separation professionally and accurately in a legally compliant manner. That should be our goal in all cases. There are different forms of employee separation. Voluntary turnover is one. And then there's involuntary turnover. So what is the difference between the two? Voluntary turnover is when employees leave because they are dissatisfied with the organization or there are better opportunities for them outside of the organization. And sometimes people are voluntarily retiring. So they're basically ending the process of their work life, and usually it can be planned properly. On the other hand, involuntary turnover is when the managers in the organization decide to dismiss employees for not meeting the performance requirements or because they were not compliant with the laws. Or you might lay people off because of bad economic times, or you might put employees on furloughs for the time being. So those are involuntary turnover. There's a cost to voluntary turnover, so we must be mindful of it. There are estimates that replacing an employee can actually cost between 90% to 200% of the person's annual salary. Think about going to recruitment, selection, training, and orientation of a new employee, how long it might take. If employees are dime a dozen mindset settles in, then we don't take care of our employees when they're actually there. That means people will leave. Even though the unemployment rate might be very, very high out there, there might be many employees who are wanting the job or to work in your company. Nonetheless, keep in mind voluntary turnover costs are very high, 90% to 200% of an employee's salary. Research shows that voluntary turnover is negatively related to workforce productivity. There's always a cost associated with people leaving, even if they're leaving on a positive note. Nonetheless, you want to reduce voluntary turnover as much as possible. Obviously, we want to reduce involuntary turnover as well, but at least that is within your control as a manager, as the employer, so you can make it a process that seems to be fair, that respects the dignity and humanity of every person. Let's look at causes of voluntary turnover. Desire of an employee to leave can be because of job dissatisfaction, low organizational commitment, low quality relationship with the immediate manager or any managers that he or she reports to, and also having high levels of stress on the job can be leading to a desire to leave. So as a result, you might see people searching for jobs and they're comparing their own job with the alternatives that they can be doing at any given time. All of this increases the intention of the employee to leave and ultimately to voluntary turnover, which we want to reduce and avoid as much as possible. Other researchers mentioned that the job embeddedness model can explain why employees stay in the organization. So think about the link of a person to work into the community, his or her relationship with the immediate manager or managers in general, their relationship with their coworkers and colleagues in the workplace. And also in the community, being members of clubs and organizations that relate to a person's work, your spouse's work, and children's school and friends, and general neighbors and friends on a professional level, at the personal level, can obviously influence a person's desire to stay with the organization, the fit of the person with the organization's values, that fit with the job, as well as in the community and the city or the environment overall. And also, the employee sometimes looks at what is it that he or she's going to lose if they leave the organization. So there's a tendency to stay if they can negotiate certain aspects of the job. For example, if you need to drop off your child to work at a certain hour, hopefully you can negotiate with the manager to come to work after the child is dropped off at the school. Job stability and security, social networks, and pride in the organization and working with you in the company, all of that influences a person's desire to stay. In terms of community, hopefully it's a short commute from home to work, as well as familiarity with the neighbors, all tend to increase a person's desire to stay there by reducing the chances of voluntary turnover. So the negative effects of voluntary turnover could include loss of human capital associated with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they have. And unfortunately, those are not always replaceable immediately. And also loss of social capital could be another negative effect of voluntary turnover. So we need to manage employee retention, gain upper management support in order to have a program that actually intervenes to stop the voluntary turnover of your employees and colleagues. Have attitude surveys, which can actually be part of predictive analytics. So you report employees' intentions to leave. And obviously, individual intentions to leave the company can be improved by considering their unique personalities and situations in the organization. Also, you can reduce the voluntary turnover by doing pulse surveys. These would be short, frequent surveys which can be used to predict and manage turnover in the department or the organization. So focus on turnover predictors. There are certain factors that are associated with high employee engagement, like job characteristics, work context, and leadership. As researchers have mentioned, the job characteristics of autonomy, using various skills at work, meaningful work, feedback, problem solving, and job complexity are all factors that influence whether people are engaged or not. The work context, like social support, low physical demands, working conditions, can enhance engagement of employees. In transformational leadership and managers and their employees' relationship in terms of quality time, discussion, communication, transparency, the level of trust that exists between the employee and manager are all predictors of turnover. The goal is to keep track of this data using employee surveys in numbers so you can make some predictions. To manage employee retention, you can also use exit interviews. So you can make good use of those exit interviews if they're conducted regularly and the data is analyzed and disseminated to enact certain changes according to the information that is given to you. Even when exit interviews are conducted on a periodic or regular basis, some employees might be reluctant to share the real reasons why they're leaving the organization. So be mindful of that information and data as well. Experts do recommend that you should always do stay interviews with those employees who are staying with the company. In other words, they're not leaving the organization, despite the fact that the market might be able to provide them better salaries, better benefits, and better opportunities at our corporation. So ask them why they're staying with the company. It's a good way to get the data and also understand their feelings. That's why pulse interviews can be very important for those who are staying with your organization. Also, you can increase retention of employees by hiring people who are a good fit for your organization. You can do a better job of onboarding employees. Onboarding teaches newcomers about the company's culture, welcomes them to the organization, connects them to others in the department or company, and also it can set them off to a good start in the organization. Some of the research that has been conducted by Korn Ferry shows that about 10 to 25% of newly hired employees leave the organization within the first 6 months of them being hired. So that's a huge percentage of employees, 10 to 25%. We can do better onboarding to make sure they stay with the company. You can also invest in high commitment human resource management practices. For example, having good employee relationships with all employees tend to reduce employee turnover. Practices that can increase embeddedness of the employee are related to lower turnover on the job. And the more you can embed the employee on the job, the more likely that they will have lower turnover intentions. Ultimately, if you cannot keep employees, you may have to resort to dismissals. An involuntary turnover basically means you as a manager or a company decide to dismiss certain employees. Dismissals are usually termination of employment because the employee has not lived up to the performance standards expected in the organization, or he or she has done something that is not in conformance with the required standards or procedures. Dismissals take place when the employee is found to be a very poor fit for the job in terms of his or her performance, or when the organization decides to terminate the relationship with a specific person. Just like voluntary turnover, dismissals also can have a cost associated with it to the organization. You don't want to be associated with illegal discrimination by letting employees go based on their gender, based on their age, based on their religious values or ethnic background or other protected categories. So make sure all your dismissals are fully aligned with the laws. And also dismissals means you do have to hire a new person, so there's a cost associated with that in the onboarding or orientation processes. Sometimes it makes sense to terminate your relationship with an employee who is not a good fit for your department or for your culture. This way, the employee can find an organization that is a better match for his or her personality. And in the meantime, you can find an employee who is a better fit for your organization's values and culture. But do all your dismissals in a respectful and professional manner at all times. So when do you dismiss an employee? Before dismissing employees, ask yourself these questions. Did you investigate the root cause of performance deficiencies? Did you help your employee to improve on those deficiencies? You can perhaps do a fishbone analysis to keep track of all the reasons why performance was not up to standard. Second, did you give employee feedback and opportunities for him or her to improve so he or she can be up to standard? Third, did you follow organizational procedures such as employee progressive discipline process, which aims to ensure that people have a chance to at least correct their behaviors and are given several chances to do so? And did you document all of this? And four, did you consider the timing of your decision? For example, if you're terminating an employee after he or she has a discrimination complaint, unfortunately, it will appear like it is retaliating against that person. So be mindful and be careful of when you are dismissing an employee. The best time to dismiss an employee is that you know you have given the person verbal warnings to make improvements about his or her performance. You have given the person written warnings to make improvements because the performance is deficient. And third would be that you've suspended the employee in a formal manner and still the performance was not improved. After verbal warning, written warning, and maybe suspension, then you can certainly terminate the employee because he or she has had plenty of opportunities to improve his or her performance. Maybe he or she does not have a desire to make improvements. Maybe he or she has better opportunities outside. Maybe he or she is not a good fit for the organization. So ultimately, it's your decision to terminate the employee because you've gone through fair process to help the employee correct his or her performance deficiencies. Obviously, there are many legal considerations. So despite the fact that you might be at an employee at-will state where the company or the organization has the right to terminate the relationship, be mindful of wrongful dismissals. A wrongful dismissal is a dismissal that actually violates the law in terms of violating the collective bargaining agreement that exists or the employment contract that was negotiated when the employee was hired at the beginning. So make sure you check with the legal counsel in the company before you terminate an employee. As part of involuntary turnover, you may choose the option of layoffs, but keep in mind, layoffs also has cost associated with it. Unfortunately, the reaction of being laid off may not be very positive. They might hurt people psychologically as well as physiologically in the organization. And there's no guarantee that layoffs can lead to improvements in the organization in terms of performance or even being better off than before. So being mindful of the organization's needs when it comes to layoffs. So are you going to lay people off based on seniority or based on how recently they were hired in the company? Or are you going to lay people off based on performance standards? If you are going to lay people off based on performance, have you kept track of good records and metrics that can be defended in a court of law in a systematic fashion? So keep in mind the importance of conducting adverse impact analysis on those who are being laid off. Because if a majority of people being laid off are men or women, then there could be gender discrimination. If majority are being laid off are Hispanic or African Americans or individuals with disabilities or those who are older workers, then again, you could have adverse impact on those individuals, which can lead to costly lawsuits. If layoff is an option that you have to implement, be mindful of the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, or otherwise known as WARN, which covers employers with at least 100 full-time employees or with at least 100 part-time and full-time employees who actually work about 4,000 hours every single week. There's a requirement of providing 60-day written advance notice for those who are being laid off. If you violate this, the government might impose certain penalties on the organization. When you're delivering the message of layoff to employees, there are some best practices in the delivery of bad news and best practices in procedural fairness. Let's look at them a bit more closely. In a bad news delivery, the manager arranges the setting in which the layoff news will be communicated. He or she delivers the news at the beginning of the meeting, so don't beat around the bush. Be honest, be specific, and be clear. Manager should provide detailed information about the layoff, and manager should react to employees' emotions that he or she observes. The manager should provide information about the next steps, such as severance payments, outplacement assistance, and other benefits that employees are entitled to. And finally, the manager should summarize the discussion about the bad news regarding layoffs. There are also procedural fairness best practices. The manager must ensure coherent delivery of the news on a consistent basis. During the communication, the manager appeals to facts. The manager should give employees a voice so they can speak their mind. The manager should provide reasonable explanations to their concerns and questions, and the manager must behave in a polite and respectful manner at all times. Of course, there are alternatives to layoffs, such as bonuses for productivity, reducing hours of employees, having furloughs, unpaid time off, seeking ideas from employees in terms of what should be done to turn this situation around. There can be the option of pay cuts, hiring freezes, job sharing, offering early retirement, moving toward a contingent workforce, temporarily stopping production, retraining of employees in utilizing work share programs. So any of these can be used as an alternative to layoffs when the possibility exists. Obviously, if layoff is a last resort, then you should do it strategically, carefully, and respectfully. At all times, try to build a reputation for being an objective, analytic, and a rational professional. You can do this again by analyzing the numbers, by analyzing the data, and analyzing all of the facts surrounding a situation so you can make evidence-based decisions. Good luck.